Warning, I say a lot of bad words. If you're under 13, you probably shouldn't be watching this.
Something's brewing at D&D.
Whoa! Well, this has been a long time coming. Time. Coming. An all-new main series Crash Bandicoot game after 12 years. Not remakes like the Insane Trilogy and Nitro Fueled or even some mobile spin-off, but a brand new game. I never thought we'd get this, but god damn it, I am so happy to be alive. This entire year has just been fucking awful, but this is at least one positive to come out of 2020. You know, in spite of the evil corporate overlords that own the franchise, I've quite enjoyed what's come from Crash Bandicoot's revival. The Insane Trilogy were pretty solid remakes of the PS1 games, even if they ruined the jet ski levels, and Nitro Fueled was an amazing remake of the original CTR and even Nitro Kart, even if the pit stop is very unsubtle about being there for corporate greed. But what I was hoping for most of all was something original instead of just another remake, and yeah, looks like we finally got it. Let's see how Toys for Bob did. Okay, just gotta make a deal with the devil and avoid accidentally giving my identity to all 200 or so people who will ever watch this video, and we're golden. Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time, that is the subtitle, and how everybody was feeling about this game, takes place about 22 years after the ending of Warped, where Dr. Cortex and Dr. Entropy along with Uka Uka got trapped in an unspecified time period, with the former being turned into babies. This franchise is very weird. I have a feeling the 22 years thing is a reference to how old Crash 3 is in the current year, given that it came out originally in 1998. And also, given that Cortex and Tropy were infants, I'm pretty sure they're now about as old as I actually am as of recording, and I do not know how to feel about this. But yeah, Uka Uka opens a portal and the two scientists leave him for dead, because evil scientists are very bad friends. Aku Aku senses a disturbance in the Force and rudely wakes Crash up to send him to investigate what all's happening. Here, Crash comes across one of the new characters known as Lonnie Loli, who is one of the Quantum Masks. He is voiced by none other than Richard Horvitz, and that, along with Aku Aku being voiced by Greg Eagles, gives off so many Billy and Mandy vibes.
Lonnie Loli? If the Quantum Masks have returned, then...
Hey Aku, how's it go?
All this game's missing is Grey Delisle, and it'd be perfect. Cortex and Tropy discover several different timelines and dimensions, and then plot to take over the entire multiverse, while having Dr. Zenjin and Bria build an army.
By my calculations, our enemies are already moving against us, and we will prevail.
Can I just say that the voice acting in this game is phenomenal? Meanwhile, Lonnie Loli has a panic attack, thus making him the most relatable character in video games, and the heroes travel through said dimensions to find the other Quantum Masks and close the Quantum Rifts. Or as Lonnie Loli puts it,
Fix this before some putz with a big evil plan and a bigger ego does something monumentally stupid!
By the way, I'm gonna be talking heavy spoilers for both gameplay and story from this point forward, so if you have a problem with me doing that for Crash Bandicoot, for some reason, if anything particularly big comes up, I'll do my best to warn you ahead of time. Alright, Crash 4, first impressions, let's see how you did. Control-wise, I'd say this game feels pretty nice to play. A typical Crash game has a general moveset of jumping, spinning, crouching, and sliding. If you've played any of the PS1 games of the Insane Trilogy, namely Cortex Strikes Back or Warped, Crash's moveset is largely unchanged here. The only big difference I can think of is that double jumping is now part of the default moveset as opposed to being unlockable, which is pretty neato. Even if other main series Crash games did that first. Everything else is mostly just tweaking and modernizing how Crash normally plays, which I imagine is largely based on the feedback the Insane Trilogy got. And yeah, as much as I love those games, their controls haven't exactly aged the best, and they definitely could benefit from being updated. Thankfully, Crash 4 has that covered. For one, Crash's movement feels a lot smoother now. You have full analog control as opposed to the 8-directional movement of the older games, and it feels great. You're also given more control in the air after a jump, along with jumping itself feeling notably more floaty, allowing you to make farther jumps in this game than you ever would have been able to normally in the older games. Honestly, in this game, that change is a fucking godsend. Believe me, with a lot of the challenges in this game, dropping like a rock after a jump like how you did before would have made this game even harder than it already is, which we'll, get to later. With the Insane Trilogy, it felt a lot like Activision was testing the waters for what people would want out of a modern Crash Bandicoot game, and I'd say 4 is pretty evident of that with all the tweaks they've made here. My only nitpick with how it plays is that I've noticed I more easily and frequently body slammed into a bottomless pit by total accident than I ever did in the older games, but that's really about it. After the first world is when the actual plot and conflict start up, and it follows a relatively consistent pattern of events. Every few worlds, you're dealing with one of the scientist characters whom you fight as a boss at the end, and in between those worlds you're collecting the other quantum masks, and being introduced to the other playable characters aside from Crash and Coco. Oh, and there's also this weird Kraken mini-boss named Luis, but nobody cares about him. Fuck you, Luis. Crash 4 is a lot more plot-heavy like Twinsanity and the Titans games, and I honestly like this direction quite a bit. It's still the typical stop the evil scientists from taking over the world thing that about 99.8496754329854% of the franchise always does, rough estimate. But there is a bit more of an actual plot here than you'd find in the original games, and it works pretty well. In most cases. Given that every world has some kind of plot point attached to it, whether it involves one of the quantum masks, villains, or the subplots with Tana from an alternate dimension, Dingodile, and Cortex, everything happens at a relatively good and consistent pace, and it's really entertaining. God, there's just so many things I love here. Cortex and Tropy's bitter hatred of each other makes perfect sense after Warped. Tana is an actually fleshed out character now. Injin and Brio make a great impression with all their end-level dialogue. Cortex's existential crisis is just brilliant. Dingodile now being a good guy is done pretty effectively. Hell, even Crash and Coco themselves are given a lot more room to express their personalities, and God, they're both just so precious. Given that this game is more cutscene and in-game dialogue based, this really gives all the characters a lot more room to make an impression than they ever really were able to before. And quite a few times I got a pretty big chuckle out of this game.
You manage our affairs with such poise.
Naturally, as do you. Ah.
I love this man, or dingo crocodile hybrid thing. He's amazing. That said, there is one character who does kinda get the shaft, and that would be, oh and by the way, spoilers, skip here if you don't want to hear it, the female Dr. Entropy from another dimension. This is such a great concept for a character in this series, and what's done with her character is really good, especially with how she and male Entropy work off each other in their narcissistic, weird, self-cestuous interactions. Sadly, what's done with her is really not much at all. She just kinda drops into the story without much of an introduction and isn't even given much end-level dialogue like the other villains got. They could've and honestly should've explored her character way more than they did, given that this is her debut appearance. Another thing is that this game's Tana is from an alternate dimension where Crash and Coco are canonically dead, which leads to her attempting to fight both Tropes by herself so this version of Crash and Coco don't die, but she kinda gets her ass kicked, I guess. I'm assuming this is supposed to be a character arc for Tana, but this whole detail feels kinda awkward and really out of place for Crash Bandicoot. Also, I do wish they made Brio a bit more like how he was in Mind Over Mutant. They referenced the game with one of his lines of dialogue during his boss fight.
Why don't people take me seriously?
Why don't people take me seriously?
So it confuses me why they didn't even try to bring over the most distinct trait about Brio in that game. At least give him one or two lines claiming he invented something. Even Nitro Fuel did that.
See this piece of machinery? I invented it!
This man wrote the Bible. God bless you indeed. All that aside, I still really like the story overall. It's funny, keeps my attention, and does all it needs to do for a game like this. I was caught by surprise with the final world of the game, which, by the way, we're going into spoiler territory again, skip here to avoid, involves Cortex traveling back in time to the events of the first game to try and stop his past self from creating Crash in the first place. This entire sequence is just brilliant, with all the callbacks and references, past and present Cortex's dialogue, and what's hands down the best final boss in the series. And then Cortex gets defeated and banished to the Realm of Darkness, where he'll probably get Norded. I think the presentation plays a large part in helping it all come together. The voice acting is about as good as it's ever been from the series, from talent like Lex Lang, Corey Burton, and Greg Eagles reprising their roles, along with all the new cast members. My favorite of the new performances is easily JP Karlak as Dr. Entropy. He just captures the character's sophisticated yet very narcissistic demeanor better than either of his previous actors, if I'm being honest.
At least Uka Uka and I attempt to free us from this prison. I won't sit idly by and listen to your inane ramblings for another decade. You chew.
Visually, God, this game just looks phenomenal. It's so expressive, making brilliant use of techniques like smear framing and squash and stretch. I feel like this really benefited the new art direction and character designs in Crash 4. Personally, I much prefer the more stylized interpretation of the Crash Bandicoot universe that Toys for Bob went for, over Vicarious Visions going for higher polygon replicas of the PS1 trilogy's assets. I mean, the Insane Trilogy doesn't look bad, and Nitro Fuel definitely refined the look of those games, but god, Crash 4 just looks so fucking beautiful. This franchise has never looked better than this. The only thing I'm kinda iffy on is Brio's voice.
Got a reward for the clever bandicoots who can reach my testing grounds, but you'll have to defeat my deadly, diabolical creations along the way.
I don't know who voiced him, mostly because Toys for Bob really needs to get better at crediting their voice talent, but it's super obvious that the voice actor is trying very hard to sound like Maurice LaMarche without actually being Maurice LaMarche, and it's very distracting. It just makes me wonder why they didn't try to get Maurice LaMarche back instead. I don't know, maybe he was busy with Animaniacs or something. I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on the author of the Bible this much, I just have my grievances. But yeah, all that aside, A+, 10 out of 10, gold stars all around. Looking at the overall game design of Crash 4, it seems that Toys for Bob took more influence from the way that Crash 1 and 2 were built than they did with Crash 3. Given that the entire game is strung along a linear overworld map like Crash 1, and a number of design elements and the minimal amount of vehicle and animal segments are all directly taken from Crash 2. As someone who considers Crash 3 to be her favorite in the series, I was somewhat disappointed by that, but given how Wrath of Cortex, the original Crash 4, was basically a carbon copy of Warped, for better and worse, I guess it's only fair. But yeah, Crash 4 surprisingly goes with the approach that the first game did with the linear map as opposed to choosing from one of 5 levels in a warp room. They're all divided up by various different level themes that feature roughly about 3 levels apiece, at least for the main story. One moment you're going through some Mad Max looking wasteland, then you're taking on piracy like you're a Nintendo executive, then later on you're dealing with a dimension with dinosaurs, and then some alien world where nitrous oxide makes a surprise cameo. It's kind of a mishmash of the time travel motif from Warped and the alternate dimension thing from Twinsanity, and I think it's a pretty interesting way to go about doing things. Really, this entire game is kind of a mishmash of things from the past games. You've got the linear progression of Crash 1, the vehicles and level design of Crash 2, the time travel plotline from Crash 3, the whole thing with new mask characters from Wrath of Cortex, the multiple playable characters thing from Twinsanity, and even a few winks and nods to the Titans games. This whole game is just a huge love letter to Crash Bandicoot with all the references, cameos, and Easter eggs that you can find, even as early as the first level. This is the best game ever made. Also, Spyro Floaty. The levels in Crash 4 are all really distinct and stand out from the rest of the series. Even if the idea is familiar, the execution feels unique for all stages. Earlier Crash games had a bit of an issue with making levels with the same theme feel distinct, but I can say that I didn't really have this issue with Crash 4 at all. Go through the level, break a bunch of crates, don't get caught in a TNT or nitro explosion, and pick up a bunch of Wumpa fruit. So yeah, it Crash Bandicoot, and Crash Bandicoot good, though it does evolve the core gameplay experience of the original trilogy in some pretty notable ways. While Crash games of old would have you collect a crystal and a gem or two in every stage, Crash 4 changes this up considerably. In every stage, there are 6 gems to collect. 1 for smashing all of the crates, 1 secret gem, 1 you get for making it through a whole level with 3 deaths or less, and 3 that you get from collecting a certain amount of Wumpa fruit. Also, there's no crystals, just get to the end of every level to proceed on. Getting a combined total of 6 gems from the base and inverted versions of a level will unlock a new skin for Crash and Coco to wear. So if you're understandably having trouble getting all the gems in a normal level, a quick run through the inverted level should help you unlock the skin you want. There's also these rail grinding and wall running segments which are pretty fun and a good challenge, though the biggest new gameplay addition comes in the form of the quantum masks. Along with their role in the story, they introduce new gameplay mechanics that bring their own unique platforming challenges to the Crash Bandicoot formula. Lonnie Loli allows you to face platforms in and out of existence with the press of a button. Akano gives you a destructive tornado spin that destroys large collections of crates and slows your descent. Kapuna Wa slows down time for certain moving or falling platforms, and also nitro crate explosions. And Ika Ika flips to gravity. While you're only allowed to utilize one of these masks at predetermined points in a level, they're utilized pretty well and make for fun challenges. Even if Ika Ika's whole gimmick is a bit disorienting and Akano's ability is a bit slippery and awkward to control in my opinion. There's one sequence near the end of the game that throws all of these abilities together, and holy fucking shit, that was so much fun. It was so goddamn brutal, but it was also so goddamn satisfying to clear. Oh yeah, and on the topic of difficulty, Crash 4. Just Crash 4. As in the whole game. It is very, very hard. Coming from a seasoned Crash Bandicoot veteran like myself, I feel like I can definitively state that Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time is without a doubt the single hardest Crash Bandicoot game I have ever played. This game makes the original Crash Bandicoot seem like child's play, and trust me, that is not hyperbole. Now granted, that has more to do with intentional design decisions as opposed to being jank as fuck, but still, I was caught pretty off guard by the challenge this game brought to the table. This is the very first main series Crash game that gives you the option to play without extra lives, and yeah, go with that option. I foolishly chose finite lives and realized how big a mistake that was by the time I got to the third world. This game does not fuck around. But that being said, I was pleasantly surprised by the challenge this game brought to the table given my experience with the series. Just make sure this is not your first Crash game, it's not exactly an ideal starting point to say the least. If we're just talking the base game of Crash 4, I don't really have much to complain about. Now, if we're talking about going for 100% completion, yeah, when attempting a completionist run of Crash 4, that's where a lot of cracks start to show. This game is kind of in the same camp as Donkey Kong 64 and Super Mario Sunshine, where the game is fun to play, but a fucking nightmare to 100% complete. There is a lot of content in this game. A lot of content. First, there's the 6 normal gems that I mentioned earlier. Then there's the colored gems that are only in a select few levels with no indication of where they might be. Then there's, of course, the time trial relics. Then there's the flashback tapes that you can only get by reaching them in a level without dying once. Then there's the flashback relics themselves, which involve you playing a challenge unlocked from said flashback tapes. Then there's the insanely perfect relics where you have to get the Wumpa gems, box gem, and secret gem in a level all in one go without a single death. And then there's the inverted levels that have their own gems, time trial relics, and insanely perfect relics, and that's without mentioning the unlockable levels where you play as Tawna, Dingodile, and Cortex. Holy shit, this game is a lot! Crash 4 was $60 at launch. It has absolutely justified its price tag, holy fuck. Now, all of this stuff is entirely optional, and you can play through the game just fine without bothering to touch any of it, but trying to do everything can get really damn monotonous. Honestly, I haven't even 100%ed the game myself, it's just too much for me to do all at once. Not to mention, this game tends to go a little bit overboard with the 100% requirements, given that this game is hiding crates and really BS spots for most of the levels, and the levels themselves can go on for a really long time. Bit of advice, do not attempt to get everything on your first run through a level. If you do that, you're gonna have a miserable time. This extra content isn't even bad on its own. The flashback relics are really fun, as are the bonus levels. It's just so not worth 100%ing this game, especially since all it does is unlock an epilogue and cliffhanger for the next game, whenever that happens. Doesn't really help the fact that the loading screens are kinda long. I've been playing this game on the base PS4, so maybe it's a bit better on the PS4 Pro or the PS5, but still. But all that aside, yeah, Crash 4 is pretty damn good. Ever since Naughty Dog departed from the franchise to make Jak and Daxter, and later torture their employees for 80 hours a week, it's always felt like the dev teams that worked on Crash really struggled to figure out where to evolve and push the series. Whether it be from unfortunate time constraints, or whatever the hell happened to spawn the Titans duology. With Crash 4 though, yeah, I'd say they nailed it this time, even with the few notable problems. As for where I'd rank it among the rest of the series, I'd still say I prefer Warped and CTR, specifically Nitro Fueled, but I'd say it's at least in my top 3 and easily the best original Crash game in a long, long time. Honestly, even just 5 years ago, I thought Crash was dead for good, but yeah, with 4 remakes and a brand new game, Crash is definitely back, and I'm looking forward to what they do with him next. Though personally, I would like to see a Spyro 4 first. Please, give my Purple Boy a new game.